On a quiet October night in 1998, the road was empty, the air cool, and the woman behind the wheel was one of the wealthiest heirs in America. But in seconds, a tragic accident unfolded, one that would stain her name for decades. Alice Walton, the only daughter of Walmart founder Sam Walton, had always been a mysterious figure compared to her brothers. She preferred art galleries to boardrooms, quiet ranch life over public speeches. But that night, behind the wheel of her SUV, the world would come to know her not for her billion-dollar fortune, but for a scandal involving alcohol, a police officer's report, and a life cut short. The headlines were merciless. Walmart heiress involved in fatal crash. Alice Walton accused of drunk driving. The whispers in Bentonville society grew louder. The police records revealed that the victim, a 50-year-old woman named Oleta Harden, had been crossing the road when Walton's car struck her. Questions swirled. Was she intoxicated? Did her immense wealth shield her from the full force of the law? Investigators noted the smell of alcohol, yet toxicology tests would vanish into a cloud of legal uncertainty. It wouldn't be the last time alcohol and the open road would collide in Alice Walton's story. In 1998, she walked away from the case without facing criminal charges. Less than a decade later, she would again be pulled over, this time on her 57th birthday, for driving under the influence in Texas. The fine, barely a dent in her fortune, $925. The public outrage, immense. But behind the headlines lay a deeper, more complicated truth. A woman fiercely devoted to art, philanthropy, and the preservation of American culture, yet haunted by a past she could never fully outrun. She poured more than $25 million into building Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, curating masterpieces that rivaled those of the Smithsonian. Yet every exhibit, every charitable gala, was shadowed by that one night, and the unanswerable question, did her wealth buy her freedom? From the quiet ranches of Texas to the marble halls of her museum in Arkansas, Alice Walton lived in a paradox, adored by the art world, criticized by the public, and largely absent from the empire her family built. Her life became a study in contrasts, privilege and controversy, generosity and scandal, beauty and tragedy. They once stood at the very top, but what happened next? Join the hidden billionaires to uncover her story. Long before the flashing blue lights on that Texas highway, before the crystal white museum walls filled with priceless canvases, Alice Louise Walton was simply the youngest child of a man who would change the face of American retail. Born on the 7th of October, 1949 in Newport, Arkansas, she arrived into a family that lived far from the gilded trappings that would later define her life. Sam Walton, her father, was still years away from founding Walmart. Her mother, Helen, was a quiet but firm presence, instilling in her children the belief that wealth, if it ever came, should never replace humility. The Walton family moved frequently in Alice's early years, following her father's business ventures across small-town America. In Bentonville, Arkansas, Alice found herself surrounded by the kind of rural simplicity that would leave a deep imprint on her soul. She grew up riding horses across open fields, her blonde hair tangled in the wind, and her boots caked in dust. Horses would remain one of her lifelong passions, long after billion-dollar valuations entered her world. In school, Alice was not the straight-A prodigy her brothers might have been, but she possessed something else, a fiercely creative mind. She loved drawing and painting, often retreating into a quiet corner of the house with sketchbooks while her brothers, Rob, Jim, and John, were busy with sports or business discussions with their father. Art, for Alice, was more than a pastime. It was an escape, a way to interpret the chaos and beauty of the world around her. Her parents, especially her mother, encouraged this artistic bent. Helen Walton was known to say that not every Walton needed to run the business. Some could contribute in other ways. This gave Alice the freedom to dream without the heavy expectation of joining the corporate machine. Still, the shadow of Walmart's rise was impossible to ignore. By the time she entered her teens, her father's stores were spreading like wildfire across the South, and the family's name was becoming synonymous with affordable goods and relentless expansion. Alice's teenage years were shaped by two worlds: the grounded, small-town values her parents insisted upon, and the growing influence of extraordinary wealth. She attended Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas, where she majored in economics and finance, a choice that seemed at odds with her creative spirit. But even in those classes, she thought differently, approaching economic theory with an artist's curiosity rather than a future CEO's precision. Graduating in the early 1972nd, Alice did not immediately gravitate toward the family business. Instead, she took a job as an equity analyst and later as an investment banker. She was fascinated by markets, but increasingly aware that the sterile world of finance lacked the texture and soul she craved. By her late 20s, she was already showing signs of charting her own course, far from the fluorescent lit aisles of Walmart. Yet, those early years also planted seeds of independence and perhaps defiance that would later define her public life. Alice Walton learned early that she could stand apart from her brothers, that she could love the Walton name without being consumed by it. But she also learned something else, that the wealth it represented could open doors, protect her, and, as the world would later question, perhaps shield her from consequences that others could not escape. From this foundation of privilege, creativity, and quiet rebellion, Alice Walton would step into adulthood ready to live life on her own terms, a choice that would lead her to extraordinary achievements and equally extraordinary controversies. Alice Walton's rise was never about climbing the corporate ladder at Walmart. That road was already well traveled by her brothers. Instead, she built her influence in a way that felt almost defiant. She would cultivate her own empire, one not of retail shelves, but of canvases, sculptures, and cultural landmarks. After graduating from Trinity University, Alice entered the financial sector, working as an equity analyst and money manager for First Commerce Corporation, and later as a broker for E.F. Hutton. She was sharp, unafraid to make high-stakes investment decisions, and quick to spot undervalued opportunities. Her early financial work gave her a strong grasp of capital markets, but it also left her restless. She was surrounded by numbers, but no color, no art, no spark. In the 1982nd, she made a surprising pivot, founding Llama Company, an investment bank based in her home state of Arkansas. It was here that Alice began shaping her own public image, not as the Walmart heiress hiding in her father's shadow, but as a financier who could move major projects forward. Llama Company played a key role in funding infrastructure, including the Northwest Arkansas Regional Airport, a project Alice championed personally. She was so passionate about the airport's potential to open her hometown to the world that she became the driving force behind its development. This was also the decade when Alice's wealth, bolstered by her Walmart inheritance, began to translate into bold acquisitions in the art world. While her brothers were buying yachts and expanding Walmart's global reach, Alice was in New York galleries and Sotheby's auctions, quietly amassing a collection of American art that would one day be the envy of national museums. She wasn't buying for status alone. She had an unshakable belief that American art deserved to be celebrated at home, not just locked away in private collections or displayed in coastal institutions. By the early 2002, Walmart had made the Waltons the richest family in America. Alice's net worth soared alongside Walmart's stock, but unlike her brothers, she largely stayed out of corporate governance. She officially stepped away from Llama Company in the late 1992 after it closed operations. But her next chapter would eclipse all her earlier achievements, the creation of Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. Opened in Bentonville in 2011, Crystal Bridges was a $200 million architectural marvel, funded almost entirely by Alice's fortune. She pored over every detail, from the Frank Lloyd Wright house relocated to the grounds to the Warhols and Rockwells hanging inside. In a region not known for high art, Alice created a destination that would bring millions of visitors and redefine Arkansas's cultural landscape. Her efforts earned praise from art historians, collectors, and civic leaders alike. The museum became a symbol of how one person's vision, backed by billions, could shift the cultural axis of an entire region. And for a time, it seemed Alice Walton had found her perfect role, a patron of the arts, unburdened by the cutthroat politics of Walmart's boardroom, shaping her legacy on her own terms. Yet, as her public reputation as an art savior grew, shadows lingered. The whispers about her past, especially the fatal 1989 accident in Mexico and the 1998 Arkansas drunk driving incident, never fully disappeared. While Crystal Bridges was celebrated in glossy magazine spreads, investigative journalists occasionally resurfaced the old stories, questioning whether her fortune had insulated her from accountability. In the years before her name would again be splashed across headlines for the wrong reasons, Alice Walton stood at the peak of her power. The world's richest art collector, the quiet queen of a billion-dollar empire, and a woman seemingly untouchable by scandal. But that illusion would not last forever. For all her success in finance and the arts, Alice Walton's name was never entirely free from the pull of controversy. While she avoided the aggressive corporate spotlight that surrounded her brothers, her personal life, particularly her relationship with alcohol and the open road, would repeatedly threaten to overshadow her achievements. The first shadow fell in 1989 Mexico, where reports surfaced that Alice had been involved in a fatal accident. Details remain murky to this day, shrouded in conflicting accounts and a lack of public records. But according to multiple sources, she allegedly struck and killed a pedestrian. Questions about legal follow-up, compensation, and justice would linger for years, largely unanswered. Nearly a decade later, in 1998, the pattern seemed to repeat. On an Arkansas highway, Alice's SUV collided with a 50-year-old woman named Oleta Hardin, killing her instantly. Witnesses claimed she had been drinking earlier that evening, and the police report mentioned the smell of alcohol. Yet no blood alcohol test results ever surfaced publicly, and prosecutors did not bring criminal charges. The incident stirred whispers of privilege shielding her from consequences. For the Hardin family, the loss was permanent. For Alice, it became a ghost that followed her into every public profile. By 2004, she had relocated much of her life to a sprawling ranch in Texas, seemingly in search of peace and privacy. But even in the quiet of Millsap, the past wasn't done with her. On the 7th of October, 2011, her 62nd birthday, Texas state troopers pulled Alice over for speeding. The dashcam recorded the arrest. Polite but firm officers conducting sobriety tests, Alice explaining she was returning home from a dinner. She was charged with driving while intoxicated. The fine? $925. The blow to her public image? Incalculable. The incident made headlines around the world. Walmart heiress arrested for DWI on birthday. For critics, it confirmed long-held suspicions that her immense wealth allowed her to escape real accountability for repeated dangerous behavior behind the wheel. The public outrage was sharpest because of the contrast. Here was a woman celebrated for bringing priceless art to the Ozarks, for revitalizing a cultural desert, yet she seemed unable or unwilling to confront her own destructive patterns. The press highlighted her philanthropy, but the comment sections were filled with angry reminders of the lives lost or endangered by her driving. Inside the art world, some donors and collaborators grew cautious. Crystal Bridges, though still thriving, faced occasional backlash from those who felt its founder's personal controversies clashed with its mission of enlightenment and education. Alice herself gave few interviews, rarely speaking directly about the incidents. When pressed, she offered measured, almost evasive remarks, preferring to let her museum's achievements speak for her. But even in silence, the damage was done. The narrative of America's richest art patron had been rewritten into something far more complicated, a woman of vast influence and generosity, but also someone whose personal choices repeatedly collided, literally and figuratively, with tragedy. The price of fame, for Alice Walton, was not the loss of fortune or position. It was the inescapable reality that no matter how much beauty she built in the world, the shadows of her past would always trail her steps. After the public fallout from her 2011 DWI arrest, Alice Walton retreated further into the sanctuary of her art world and personal estates. Unlike many celebrities who face scandal and attempt dramatic public comebacks, Alice chose a path of relative silence and selective appearances, letting her work speak louder than headlines. She continued to pour immense resources into Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, expanding its collection and solidifying its status as a cultural powerhouse. In many ways, the museum became her sanctuary, a place where the shadows of her personal controversies could be drowned out by the timeless beauty of masterpieces from Norman Rockwell to Georgia O'Keeffe. Through this, she sought to build a legacy far greater than a headline or scandal. Away from the public eye, Alice also invested heavily in her private life. Her ranch in Millsap, Texas, became a refuge where she could enjoy her lifelong passion for horses and the quiet rhythms of country living. The sprawling estate was equipped with facilities for horse breeding and training, reflecting a deep connection to a lifestyle that predated her billionaire status. Friends describe her as fiercely private, someone who values solitude and the simple pleasures that money can buy but not happiness. Philanthropy remained a cornerstone of Alice's life after the storm. She donated millions to education, healthcare, and the arts beyond Crystal Bridges, quietly funding initiatives that many never heard about. Yet she shied away from media attention on these efforts, preferring her generosity to remain anonymous or under the radar. However, not all was tranquil. Periodic whispers and rumors about her personal struggles with alcohol resurfaced in tabloids and gossip columns, though no further legal issues became public. Despite this, her role as a powerful and influential woman in America's cultural scene remained intact, albeit tinged with the complex history of her past. Surprisingly to many, Alice did not attempt to assume any executive role in Walmart, the retail giant her family built. Instead, she maintained her shares and influence behind the scenes, content with focusing on her passions rather than corporate power plays. This choice has sparked speculation. Was it humility, disinterest, or perhaps a desire to avoid the relentless scrutiny faced by her brothers? Today, Alice Walton lives a life that balances immense privilege with deep privacy. She is often seen attending gala openings, quietly supporting artists, or riding horses across her Texas ranch. To the outside world, she remains an enigma, a billionaire heiress with a haunted past, an art patron with immense cultural impact, and a woman who has chosen to live on her own terms, no matter the cost. They once stood at the very top, but what happened next? Join the hidden billionaires to uncover her story. Alice Walton's story is often told as a solo journey, the artistic heiress who carved her own path, but family has always been a subtle, complex thread running through her life. Unlike many of her siblings, Alice has never married and has no children, a fact that has fueled both speculation and curiosity about the future of her immense fortune and legacy. The Walton family itself is famously private but tightly knit in business. Alice's three brothers, S. Robson, Jim, and John Walton, all played active roles in expanding Walmart's global empire. The brothers' families continue to control a substantial portion of Walmart stock, with each branch carefully stewarding their inheritance. Yet Alice's branch remains unique. With no direct heirs, the question of who will inherit her billions has loomed large in philanthropic and financial circles. Over the years, Alice has chosen to direct much of her wealth into institutions and foundations designed to endure beyond her lifetime. The Walton Family Foundation, to which she contributes significantly, focuses on education reform, environmental conservation, and arts funding. This institutional approach has arguably become her way of passing the torch, shaping the world according to her values without relying on bloodline succession. Within the arts world, Alice has become somewhat of a matriarch. She has supported emerging artists and institutions across the country, championing American art in a way that few others have. Her influence reaches beyond museum walls as she mentors younger patrons and philanthropists, encouraging a new generation to value culture as a form of national identity. However, the family legacy is not without its fractures. The Walton fortune and business empire have faced internal disputes over governance, stock sales, and charitable priorities. Alice's decision to remain mostly detached from Walmart's corporate machinations has occasionally caused tension among her siblings, especially given the family's outsized influence on American retail and philanthropy. Yet, perhaps more than any family quarrel, Alice's true legacy lies in her visionary creation of crystal bridges and her commitment to preserving and promoting American art. In a country where cultural funding often depends on government or corporate patronage, she has forged a new model, one of private wealth fueling public enrichment. As the years pass, questions about the future of her fortune grow louder. Will her art empire and philanthropic network outlast her? Will the Walton name continue to be associated with culture as much as commerce? And will new heirs, chosen or born, carry on the delicate balance she has struck between power, privacy, and passion? Alice Walton's legacy is unlike that of most billionaires. While many focus purely on business empires, Alice's name is forever entwined with a cultural renaissance in the heart of America. Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art stands not just as a building filled with masterpieces, but as a symbol of what private wealth can do when aimed at enriching society's soul. Before Crystal Bridges, the American art world was largely centered on coastal cities like New York and Washington, D.C. Alice's vision to build a world-class museum in Bentonville, Arkansas, challenged that status quo. The museum now hosts works spanning centuries, showcasing artists from the forgotten to the famous and bringing cultural education to millions who might never otherwise experience it firsthand. Art historians and critics recognize her as a transformative patron who shifted attention to overlooked American artists and diversified collections nationwide. The impact of her investment ripples beyond Arkansas, inspiring other wealthy philanthropists to embrace art patronage as a means of lasting influence. But the legacy is not without controversy. Critics question whether the immense fortune that built Crystal Bridges should be untangled from the shadow of past scandals, accidents, and allegations that never fully cleared her name. They argue that philanthropy cannot erase the consequences of privilege shielding one from accountability. Experts debate whether Alice Walton's story serves as a cautionary tale or an inspirational blueprint. To some, she embodies the power of wealth to create beauty and education. To others, she is a reminder that enormous privilege carries an outsized responsibility, one that some fail to meet. Despite the debates, her influence is undeniable. Universities have hosted lectures on her museum's curatorial innovations. Foundations reference her model of private funding for public good. Crystal Bridges itself has won numerous awards and inspired a new generation of American art lovers. For better or worse, Alice Walton has redefined what it means to be a billionaire heiress. Not merely an inheritor of fortune, but a creator of culture, a complex figure whose life reflects both the promise and peril of extreme wealth. Alice Walton's life is a story of contrasts, vast wealth and quiet privacy, artistic passion and public controversy, generosity shadowed by tragedy. She inherited one of the world's greatest fortunes, but chose a path far from the corporate spotlight, forging her own legacy in the arts and philanthropy. Her story teaches us that immense privilege can open doors to extraordinary achievements, but it can also shield uncomfortable truths and personal struggles. The fatal accidents and DUI charges that punctuated her life remind us that no amount of money can fully erase the consequences of reckless choices. Yet Alice's vision to build crystal bridges and her commitment to American art have reshaped cultural landscapes, providing millions access to beauty and history. Her life asks difficult questions about power, responsibility, and the price of fame in a world where wealth can both build and destroy. Was the price of fame truly worth paying? For Alice Walton, it is a question still unanswered, living in the silence behind her museum's walls and the stories untold in the shadows of her past. If you found this story eye-opening, subscribe and stay tuned for more hidden truths from the world's richest.